Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Welcome to our meeting of the Strategic Planning Committee here at County Hall on Tuesday the 3rd of October. As is normal at these meetings, I roughly go through the procedure that we follow at our planning committee. As chair, I normally introduce the application, ask if you have seen the site visit videos. We then ask the planning officer to give us any updates, any changes to his recommendations, and then present his report. We then have the public speaking slot, 5 minutes for objectors, 5 minutes for a local member, parish councillor, town councillor, and 5 minutes for a supporter. The members of the planning committee can then ask questions to the planning officer, and then we proceed with a debate, ask for a proposal, a seconder, and then debate proper, and then we take a vote. Thank you. Any apologies for absence today, Leslie?
Yes, Chair, I've received apologies from councillors Ball and Robinson.
Thank you. Minutes of the previous... Sorry.
I think we need to put the apologies in for Councillor Dodd and Councillor Renner Thompson.
Yes, I think that's probably wise. Yeah, thank you. Minutes of the previous meetings. Minutes of the planning meeting held on Tuesday the 1st of August. These have been circulated. Would members of the committee confirm they're a true record of the meeting? Thank you. Any members got any disclosures of interest they wish to declare? No? So then we proceed with determination of planning applications. Item number 6 on the agenda is the erection of ground-mounted solar farm with associated ancillary equipment, and this is land northeast of Wupperton Station, Wupperton in Northumberland. So, can I ask our planning officer, David Lowe, to take us through this application, please? David, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. There are no updates provided in this application, but I do want to inform members that it is as per the application report, it is a retrospective submission. So in the location plan, the site is located to the rear of A&J Scott Sawmills along the A697 between Palburn and Wooler. The site is bounded on two sides by the B6346, which if you were to follow that, you'd end up in Alnwick. There's woodland and the sawmill itself. Wupperton Sand and Gravel Quarry is to the northwest. Members will have read my addendum report last week. The aspirational footpath that the report refers to follows the old railway line and will need to skirt around the sawmill site regardless. Would have to skirt around the site regardless of the outcome of this proposal. However, the path is aspirational only and does not hold any material weighting at present. It's not a right-of-way and it's not a formally safeguarded route. However, the sawmill occupies the route of the former railway and there's a gap between the sawmill and the solar farm, so there may be opportunity there, subject to separate conditions and agreements out with the planning process to provide the route for that particular project. The constraints map, the purple with the red outline is the sawmill site. It's a protected employment land within the local plan. The yellow to the north of it is the sand and gravel minerals allocation. The large purple areas are mineral safeguarding. Sorry, there we are, site plan. So you can see the panels are to the northeast of the sawmill. We have a 6-foot boundary fence along for security. It's much akin to deer fencing. Connection to the existing substation is the sort of dog-leg tail coming down from the south of the site. What the site plan doesn't show is the amount of vegetation around the site, which, as you'll have gathered from the site videos, is fairly substantive. In terms of what the panels look like, they're tilted at a 22-degree angle, anchored on 1.8 metre posts in the ground. They rise to a maximum height of 2.5 metres above the ground level. The panels each are 4.5 metres wide, and there are some 4,500 of them with an output of 2.5 megawatts with a 40-year lifespan. So moving on to an aerial photograph. Perhaps I've used the wrong thickness of marker on this image, but essentially what I'm trying to highlight are the degrees of landscape and visual impact. So the red lines that I've marked, I've got one just to the south of the sawmill site, adjacent to the rough rectangular strip of woodland. That's a viewpoint. As you were travelling north, you get a fleeting view of the solar farm, and then you're sort of beyond it, facing northwest and view away from the solar farm. The solid red lines to the front of A&J Scott Sawmill and up along the B Road to the north of the site, you have sort of a continuous experience. So I'm just going to talk through some images. So as you're travelling north from Powburn, this is the image you'd see. You can see the sawmill site is just where my pointer is in the background here. Apologies, I didn't feel comfortable walking along here when there's no footpath along a fast section of road. This is the next image, and you can see I've highlighted where the solar farm would be approximately. You are seeing it in this particular. This is a snapshot, so not necessarily a representative of the experience, but you can see that it would be backdropped by existing woodland. You're already seeing it with a paraphernalia of the sawmill already. This isn't a pristine virginal landscape. This is a landscape characterised by farming activities and rural activity and rural industry. These are some images now taken from the front. Now, I have parked up my vehicle and walked along the verge, and I'm peering through the trees to try and capture these images. The site is visually very well contained. Like I say, I'm literally peering through the trees to try and capture this image. And you are seeing it in context of the sawmill. The site already has permission, an extant live permission for employment sheds. So that would be the baseline for any landscape study. And again, I'm sort of peering over the fence, trying to capture some images. You really don't see much of the sawmill. As you would turn right up the 697 and onto the B Road, on the left-hand side of this image is Whooperton Sand and Gravel Quarry, fairly well contained itself. On the right-hand side is the solar farm. You can see the bund that's being created to level off the land. So you do get an experience, a continuous experience around here. So you got there, round the corner, and again, you start getting this experience of these solar panels. This image isn't particularly recent. I can confirm that the panels along this edge are all installed. And then this is a recent image. This was only taken about a few weeks ago, and you can see the panels are already in place in situ. And you've seen from the site videos that as you would travel along the opposite direction, coming towards the site with the access on your left, there's very limited view of the solar farm. It's all behind fairly substantial vegetation. So the visual impact is fairly minimal and restricted to local views. So in planning balance, the site does form part of a minerals allocation, but it benefits from extant planning permission for industrial sheds. The extant application demonstrated the mineral resource in this location is not extensive, so it's not a loss to the aggregate supply. This was determined during the local plan preparation, and it was too late to amend the allocation at that time, so that's why I've recommended this as a departure to the relevant policy. We've comments from our policy team raising no objections to the proposal on this basis. The solar farm will directly benefit an existing business, which because of its nature requires a rural location. It's quite an electrical hungry operation as well. Officers recommend that the application is approved by members subject to the conditions in the addendum report issued last week. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir.
Chair, for the opportunity to address the committee. My name is Robert Scott, Managing Director of A&J Scott. As the case officer has described in the presentation, the proposal is for a ground-mounted solar farm with associated ancillary equipment on the land adjacent to Station Sawmills near Wupperton. The PV panels will be sited across just over 2 hectares of land and will generate much-needed sustainable source of electricity for the sawmill business. We are a family-owned and run Northumbrian business, established in 1960, still operating from our original site. We supply high-performance sawn timber nationwide for a variety of uses, sourced from local sustainably managed forests. We directly employ over 150 people in a range of skilled roles and indirectly support over 100 more jobs in the supply chain. We have undertaken regular investment in the business to ensure it continues to have state-of-the-art production facilities and enables us to meet the demands of our increasingly diverse customer base. In recent years, this has included a new high-speed log grading line, new weighbridge, and increased log storage areas. The proposed development will enable us to generate our own electricity from renewable sources, reducing our dependency on the national grid and energy generated from fossil fuels. No electricity will be exported or sold back to the grid, and it will be used to meet the demands of the sawmill. Energy prices remain incredibly high, and whilst households were being offered some support from the government to manage bills, businesses received limited support and had to bear the brunt of the costs. The sawmill business has significant electricity demands, and our energy costs are significant as well. Therefore, it has been therefore vital to us to explore ways to reduce this cost burden and ensure our business is protected in the long term. This economic context is why the application is part retrospective, as we made a decision in the face of ever-increasing energy costs to start the construction of the development in the hope that being able to make the best use of the increased daylight levels through the summer and reduce our bills accordingly. We appreciate this wasn't the correct process to follow, and when raised by the planning officer, work on site ceased. As is typical for renewable energy proposals, the planning application seeks consent for a 40-year period. Conditions proposed by your planning officer require details of decommissioning at the appropriate future time. Whilst the site is covered by a mineral safeguarding allocation, we have set out in our application that the proposal will not permanently sterilise the potential supply beneath the site, and that, notwithstanding, there is strong supply of existing reserves for sand and gravel extraction in Northumberland. Furthermore, there is no interest in the site from local mineral extraction companies, including the adjacent Wupperton quarry operator. Our conclusion that the significant need and sustainability benefits of the proposed scheme outweigh the temporary loss of access to the potential mineral supply at the site, as is agreed by the Council's officers. Turning to the potential landscape and visual impacts of the proposed development, the proposal is not in a particularly visually sensitive location. There are no landscape designations covering the site, and the site is relatively well screened by boundary vegetation. There are no dwellings or flight paths in close proximity which could be impacted by potential glint or glare. An ecology assessment has been undertaken which did not identify any adverse impacts to habitats or protected species. Various biodiversity enhancements are proposed which ensure more than a 10% biodiversity net gain that will be achieved. The site is not at a high risk of flooding, and the proposed drainage scheme will ensure that there's no adverse impact from surface water runoff to either the sawmill or the adjoining land. We have had significant engagement with the Council's Highways Officer to respond to their comments and have provided the additional information they requested. There will be very little traffic generated by the development through the remainder of the construction period, and it is agreed with the Highways Officer that there are no highway concerns arising from the development. All comments from the officers and consultees have been positively responded to during determination, and there are no technical objections. We will welcome the conclusion by the Planning Officer in his report that the development will provide a range of benefits and the proposal is acceptable in planning terms. We respectfully request that you support this application in line with your officer's recommendation for approval and grant planning consent for the proposed solar farm, helping ensure the long-term sustainability of our established local business. Thank you.
Any questions you would like to put to our planning officer? Councillor Georgina Hill.
Just a quick question on this. Northumbrian Water's comments about if the drainage arrangements change, then they'd request reconsultation. Have you got a bit more details about the drainage arrangements, the issues around that, and whether they have changed?
The drainage details weren't changed in principle. The system remained consistent. There was some detailing that was provided, flow rates, etc., which are agreed with the LLFA as opposed to Northumbria Water. So there was no need for reconsult with Northumberland Water during the process.
Thank you. Any more questions? Martin.
Thank you, Chair. At 7.1, page 20, we've got supporting statement of the planning application indicates the quality of the sand and gravel resource in the part of the site allocated is not economically viable for extraction. No commercial interest in extraction, despite the site being promoted by the operator through the local plan process. And then the supporting statement also indicates that the application site is now under the ownership of the applicant and would not be available for a mineral operator to develop. Now, I understand from the report that sort of quarter of the site will be sterilised, I think the term is, to stop the further 40 years to stop sand and gravel export. But does that mean that the whole of the site now is sort of taken out of our local plan allocation, and how does that work?
So it's only this portion of the allocation that would come out of, that essentially, the reality is it comes out. We wouldn't change our local plan to reflect that. So anything that comes forward would be a departure to Min 8, to policy Min 8, as I've presented here today. So there'd be no formal change to the local plan, but the remainder of the allocation remains optional should the landowner come forward to extract mineral resource at that time. At the time of the previous application, the one that's currently extant for the employment uses, the applicant demonstrated at that time that what was in this portion of the allocation wasn't a lot there. So they provided borehole data which showed there wasn't much in this portion of the allocation. So in real terms, yes, this portion comes out of the allocation. In procedural terms, there's no mechanism at the moment that would allow us to review that allocation formally.
Okay, thank you. And my other question is around 7.29, which is the biodiversity net gain kind of element. The last part of the paragraph says, justification has been provided as to why it would not be feasible to create a more species-rich grassland, and this is accepted and proportionate to the predicted impact on biodiversity. Could you just talk us through that? Because obviously these sites go from agricultural land to improved biodiversity, and we want to try and maximise that aspect of it, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So the development plan requires biodiversity net gain. The requirement for 10% won't come in until January. I'm sure members saw the press release from Westminster earlier last week, I think it was. So we do have a net gain achieved on the site. The extant planning permission achieved, I think it was 10% off the top of my head, but it achieved more than they had to at that time when that was determined. The submission of this application meant that the mitigation measures agreed through that permission couldn't be achieved because of the ground coverage of solar panels. So we've had an amended scheme to that. So off the back of this, there's been another application to amend the extant permission. Sorry, it's quite a bit has gone on. So we've amended the extant live permission, which remains live. That's been implemented, condition is discharged, etc. So that's now live in perpetuity. And this application, again, because of the ground cover, we couldn't achieve the degree of species-rich grassland that we'd wanted to do. So discussions with our ecology department was that to offset the loss of the species-rich grassland, we have a planning condition about boundary treatments And what we're looking for in that is a degree of additional planting, hedgerows, which are a habitat principal importance, etc. So that's how we are achieving the net gain. It's not a net gain of 1%. I can't remember the exact figure, but it's not like 0.1%. It's 6% or something like that is the figure. Apologies, I can't remember off the top of my head. But it's fairly substantial for above and beyond what's required currently in policy.
Thank you. Any more questions, ladies and gentlemen? No more questions? Could I have a recommendation, please? Garen Thompson?
Move the officer's recommendation as in the report, Chairman.
Thank you. Is that seconded? Seconded by Councillor Gordon-Stewart. Any debate on this, ladies and gentlemen? No debate? We feel we've explored the planning application under standard. So, all those in favour of the planning application?
That's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you. That application is approved. So, our second application this afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, is a variation of a condition, which relates to Shadfern Park Drift, Shadfern, Northumberland. It's a former open cast site that is being restored, and what we're asking for this afternoon is a 10-year time extension for that restoration. David, this is your application too. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Chair. I do have one update for members. It's just a single update. I'd like to propose the rewording of Condition 1. Just to read, as I've got on the screen there, achieves the same thing, but rather than just saying a straight 10-year deadline from the date of the permission, I've put a date in there, the 31st of October 2033. It's just in the interests of precision and in the interests of just, I think that it meets the requirements of the conditions tests better by stating an actual date. It's more precise. That's the only update I have for members. In terms of the location plan, Morpeth is to the west of this location. The A196 is along the south there. You'll see the red line, little sort of triangle at the bottom there, which is encases the access. Then the main site to the north. The wider area is actually Greenbelt, and it's characterised by some sporadic development of rural character interspersed between settlements. So the constraints map, not very much on the constraints map. If I'd had the Greenbelt layer on, the entire screen would be green, so I took that off. And the site's recognised as an allocation for an inert landfill facility under policy WAS4. Site plan, the green represents quarry faces and rough vegetation, with a clay overburden helping to form the water body at the bottom there. Now that's the sort of yellow area and the north extent. You can see the shape of the restored site with respect to the tight contour lines forming a sort of a gully down the middle there. We have a wheel wash facility near the entrance at the bottom of the screen, and various plant over on the left-hand side. Series of photographs. Members will be aware from the site video. The site's pretty well greened up at the moment. You'll see a shed in the background of some of these images. The shed doesn't form part of the site. You can see how well greened up that is. Again, that's the shed I refer to. So when I talked about sort of the water body and the tight contours, you can see that quite evidently on the right-hand side of this image. The water body would be down in that gully. Again, just a very green image. The application seeks a continuation of activities, and the Environment Agency will be responsible for monitoring of the material quality and the groundwater. The material comes from the applicant's operations only. Although the length of time it's taking to restore the site is frustrating, it also demonstrates how successful our recycling industry is in Northumberland, that such little inert material is being landfilled. We have no concerns from third parties or consultees, and officers are quite happy to see the continuation of activities and ultimately the completion of the works. From various discussions with the applicant, we understand that they do not anticipate requiring the full 10-year period, and we can expect works to be completed substantially sooner. Our officers recommend that the application is approved, subject to the amended condition in this presentation and those numbered 2 onwards in your reports. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen of the committee, we have no public speaking on this application. Have you any questions you wish to put to our planning officer? Georgina Hill.
Thank you. As ever, you're looking at a planning application, you look at what the pros are and what the cons are. I mean, the only slight con is thinking coming to extend 10 years, and 10 years will be asked for more. But there doesn't seem to be, could you just confirm this, there doesn't seem to be any issues with the use of the site. Nobody's complained about it, nobody's losing by this, is that right? There's no opposition, no problems with this site at all?
That's my understanding. I'm not aware of any complaints. Our monitoring officer, Alex Guy, goes out three times a year, I think, to this site. And there's no issues. We liaise with the Environment Agency. They've not mentioned that, they haven't told us there's any issues with it in terms of groundwater quality. They haven't raised anything with us with respect to the quality of material going on the site. So, yeah, I mean, it forms an allocation in the plan for inert landfill. It is taking a long time, you're right. I think we would all share that frustration. But equally, the other way of looking at that is, as I mentioned, shows the success of the recycling operation in Northumberland, which shows how little material is being landfilled, and that's a positive thing. So, yes, it's frustrating it's taking so long, but equally, it seems to be a very well-run site. I'm not aware of any third-party complaints through the enforcement mechanism, and there's no organisations such as the EA have raised any issues with us.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Martin Swinburne? Yes, sir.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering what the kind of final form of the site will be when it is fully restored, and obviously there's a water body that's forming there now which is being pumped out. Will there be a water body at the end of the restoration period?
So the site plan I've popped up on screen sort of shows the finished product, if you will. So the brown, the sort of yellowy brown at the top there, that's the clay. So you'd use your clay overburden as a non-porous level to retain the water body. And you can see it's going to form a sort of a steeply sided gully, essentially. The site's being restored for nature purposes, so our ecologists are happy with this. Yeah, I mean, it's without sort of 3D modelling, a bit tricky to show exactly what it would look like. But essentially, what we would have is a landform which, consistent with that, adjacent to it rising up, and then coming down into that gully, forming that water body at the bottom. And that water body, that any runoff from that is monitored by the EA. And I can't remember the exact levels of water body we expect, but you can see with what the water body is now, relatively small, and the degree of clay overburden will obviously prevent that from flooding out with the site. So the LLFA haven't raised any concerns about this either. The contour lines, for members who perhaps aren't so familiar with these sorts of plans, the contour lines around the site are at 1 metre intervals. So you can see it's sort of fairly relaxed gradient and then coming in steeper to that gully. So if that, along with the photographs, gives you an idea of something very, very green, ultimately is what we're going to have with some steep sides going down to the gully. So that's essentially what it is. That image there is probably the best one in terms of giving an idea of the gradient. because those slopes are finished as I understand it. So there's not a huge amount more material to be put in that end. The material, is, as you would have seen from the videos, is more, so you work from the back forward. So that's the area that's still to be finished. So the bulk of the site is done, we would say.
Thank you, Martin. Any more questions, ladies and gentlemen? No more questions? Could I have a recommendation, please? Barry Flux.
I'll move approval in line with the recommendation in the officer's report.
Thank you. And Martin is seconding that. Thank you. Any debate, ladies and gentlemen? No debate. Going straight to the vote. All those in favour?
It's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you very much. So, apart from those two applications, ladies and gentlemen, we have an appeals update, pages 45 to 58. Everybody happy with those? Just for information, really, but if anybody has any queries. And then we've got section 106, agreement update report. Again, for information. And as chair, I've got no urgent business, but I'd like to thank you all very much for coming along this afternoon and hopefully enjoying the earlier presentation we had and taking your important